Nobody touched Vivian DeLuca and survived. That was the first thing I learned 5 minutes after arriving at the Moretti estate, standing beneath a chandelier bigger than my entire apartment while rain hammered against the mansion windows hard enough to sound like warning shots. The other maids kept their eyes lowered as they rushed across the marble floors in black uniforms so perfectly pressed they looked terrified of wrinkling them. One girl bumped my shoulder carrying a silver tray stacked with champagne flutes and immediately whispered an apology like I was the dangerous one. I should have left right then. I should have taken the subway back to Queens and figured out another way to pay for my brother's surgery. But desperate people don't walk away from jobs paying $40 an hour. They swallow their instincts and keep moving. Claire. The head housekeeper snapped her fingers in front of my face. You listening? I straightened immediately. Yes, ma'am. Tonight is important. Politicians, investors, family associates. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not look guests in the eye. And whatever happens, her voice lowered as thunder rattled the windows. Do not upset Miss Vivian. Across the ballroom, I finally saw her. Vivian DeLuca stood near the grand staircase in a silver gown that probably cost more than my mother made in a year before she died. Diamonds glittered against her pale skin every time she lifted her champagne glass. Beautiful. Cold. Untouchable. People laughed too quickly at her jokes. Men twice her age shifted nervously when she looked at them. Even the security guard seemed tense around her. Then she smiled at a waiter who accidentally brushed her sleeve while passing by. The poor guy nearly stopped breathing. She's engaged to Damian Moretti, another maid whispered beside me while arranging crystal plates. That makes her more dangerous than him sometimes. Damian Moretti. Even hearing the name felt heavy. Everybody in New York knew it. Hotels. Shipping companies. Real estate. Rumors whispered in bars after midnight. Stories about men disappearing after crossing him. I used to think those stories were exaggerated until I saw the security around this place. Men in dark suits stood at every entrance with earpieces hidden beneath perfectly cut hair. They moved like soldiers pretending to be servants. One glance told me they weren't here to protect the guests from strangers. They were here to protect strangers from the people inside this mansion. Claire. I looked up too slowly. Vivian was staring directly at me from across the ballroom. Her blue eyes moved over my plain black uniform, my worn shoes, the tiny coffee stain near my cuff I thought nobody noticed. Silence spread around us so quickly it felt rehearsed. Come here. My stomach tightened. I walked toward her carefully, aware of every wealthy guest watching. Vivian tilted her head slightly once I stopped in front of her. Up close, she smelled like roses and expensive perfume layered over something sharper underneath. You're the new maid? Yes, ma'am. Her eyes narrowed at my voice. Queens. I nodded once. I can always tell. A few people laughed softly around her. My cheeks burned, but I kept my expression still. I needed this job. I needed the money. I needed my little brother breathing more than I needed my pride. Vivian lifted her champagne glass slowly. Then let me teach you something about this house, Claire Bennett. Her smile widened while lightning flashed against the massive windows behind her. Here, people like you survive by remembering their place. The room laughed softly after Vivian's comment, the kind of quiet rich people laughter designed to humiliate without raising voices. I kept my hands locked behind my back so nobody would see them trembling. I asked you a question, Vivian said, swirling the champagne in her crystal glass. Do girls from Queens always stare like frightened deer, or is that just you? Another ripple of laughter moved through the guests. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to answer calmly. I am just trying to do my job, ma'am. Then try harder. She handed me her empty glass without looking at me again, dismissing me like furniture. I took the glass and walked away carefully while heat crawled up my neck. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But all I could think about was Tyler sitting in a hospital room in Brooklyn with tubes taped to his arm, pretending not to notice the bills stacking beside his bed. Kidney failure at 16 years old was not something minimum wage fixed quickly. So I swallowed my pride the same way I swallowed cheap coffee every morning. Bitter. Necessary. The ballroom grew louder as more guests arrived. Men in tailored black suits. Women wrapped in diamonds and silk. Waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of lobster appetizers and imported champagne while a string quartet played near the staircase. Outside, rain streaked down the massive windows overlooking Manhattan like the entire city was melting beneath the storm. I was adjusting silverware near the head table when the atmosphere changed. It happened instantly. Conversations slowed. Heads turned toward the entrance. Even the musicians faltered for half a second before continuing. Damien Moretti had arrived. I felt him before I saw him. The pressure in the room shifted the way air changes before lightning strikes. Then he stepped through the double doors wearing a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it looked painted onto him. Tall. Broad shoulders. Dark hair brushed back neatly despite the rain outside. The kind of face magazines would call handsome if his eyes were not so cold. Security surrounded him at a distance, but nobody needed to announce who he was. Power followed him naturally. Quietly. Terrifyingly. Guests moved aside without being asked. Politicians smiled too quickly when he shook their hands. Men who probably owned entire companies lowered their voices around him. But Damien himself barely reacted to any of it. He walked through the ballroom with the calm expression of someone accustomed to obedience. Vivian's entire demeanor transformed the second she saw him. Her sharpness softened into performance. She crossed the room elegantly and kissed his cheek while cameras from nearby reporters flashed softly. "You are late," she teased. Damien rested one hand lightly against her waist, but his eyes looked bored. "Traffic." His voice was low and smooth, carrying easily through the room despite barely rising above conversation. "Level." Then his gaze moved. Straight toward me. My pulse stumbled so hard I nearly dropped the stack of plates in my hands. It only lasted a second. Maybe less. But those pale gray eyes swept over me with unsettling precision before moving away again. Not interested. Not flirtatious. Observant. Like he catalogued people automatically. Vivian noticed immediately. Women like her noticed everything. Claire. My name snapped through the ballroom sharply enough to make me flinch. "Bring us another bottle." I hurried forward with the champagne while trying not to spill anything. Damien stood beside Vivian near the staircase now, one hand tucked into his pocket while politicians circled him like nervous sharks. Up close, he smelled faintly of cedarwood and rain. I poured carefully into Vivian's glass first. Then Damien's. Vivian watched me the entire time. Waiting. Hunting for mistakes. My hand remained steady until her heel slid suddenly in front of my shoe. I stumbled forward instinctively. Champagne splashed across the front of Vivian's silver dress. Silence crashed over the ballroom so fast it felt violent. Vivian stared down at the stain spreading across the fabric. Then she slowly lifted her eyes toward me. And smiled. The stain spread slowly across Vivian's silver dress like spilled mercury under the ballroom lights. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I stepped back immediately, my heart slamming so hard it hurt. "I am so sorry," I whispered. "It was an accident." Vivian stared at the champagne dripping from the fabric for 3 long seconds before laughing softly. The sound was calm enough to make it worse. "An accident," she repeated. Around us, wealthy guests pretended not to watch while watching everything. Damien remained beside her, silent, one hand still resting inside his pocket. His expression did not change at all. Vivian took the linen napkin from my trembling hands and glanced down at it with visible disgust before dropping it onto the floor between us. Clean it. Heat rushed into my face instantly. The marble beneath her heels glimmered under the chandeliers while dozens of powerful people stood only feet away pretending humiliation was entertainment. I bent slowly to pick up the napkin because rent was due next week. Because hospital bills did not care about dignity. Because life had already taught me pride was expensive. My fingers had barely touched the cloth when Vivian spoke again. No, her voice cut cleanly through the room. On your knees. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone near the staircase quietly cleared his throat. But nobody intervened. Nobody ever intervened when powerful people decided to be cruel. My chest tightened so hard it became difficult to breathe. I looked up instinctively toward Damien for one impossible second. Maybe because everyone else feared him. Maybe because people with real power usually did not need to prove it this way. But his face remained unreadable. Cold. Detached. Like he was observing weather instead of people. Vivian noticed the glance immediately. Her smile sharpened. Did you hear me? She asked softly. Or do maids from Queens need instructions repeated? My stomach twisted. Slowly, I lowered myself onto the polished marble floor while cameras from nearby reporters flashed somewhere across the ballroom. The expensive fabric of my uniform soaked up champagne instantly as I pressed the napkin against her shoes. The humiliation burned hotter than anger at first. Hotter than shame. I could practically hear my mother's voice from years ago telling me never to let people reduce me to this. But my mother had died cleaning hotel rooms 12 hours a day because survival did not leave room for pride either. Careful, Vivian murmured while adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Those shoes cost more than your apartment. Laughter flickered quietly around us again. I kept wiping the floor because if I stopped, I was afraid I might cry. And I refused to cry in front of these people. Above me, Damien finally moved slightly. I felt it before I saw it. His attention settling fully onto me for the first time all evening. Heavy. Focused. The ballroom noise blurred around the edges while I tried to steady my breathing. Then Vivian tilted her champagne glass carelessly. A stream of pale gold liquid spilled directly onto my hair. Cold. Sticky. Intentional. Gasps spread softly through the crowd. My entire body froze. Champagne dripped down the side of my face onto the marble floor while humiliation crashed into something far more dangerous inside my chest. Not fear anymore. Anger. Slow. Sharp. Alive. Vivian leaned closer, her diamonds glittering inches from my face. That, she whispered sweetly, is what happens when people forget their place. Something inside me snapped quietly at those words. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was months of watching my little brother suffer while rich people spent $10,000 on flowers for parties. Maybe it was the memory of my mother apologizing to hotel guests who treated her like trash until the day she died. I stood up slowly. The ballroom fell silent again. Champagne slid from my hair onto my shoulders while Vivian's amused expression faded just slightly for the first time all night. Then she smiled coldly and lifted her hand. And before I could think, before reason could stop me, her palm struck sharply across my cheek in front of every person in that room. The sound echoed across the ballroom louder than the orchestra had all night. Vivian's head snapped sideways slightly before the entire room froze in absolute silence. My breathing stopped. My hand still hung in the air from pure instinct, my cheek burning where she had struck me seconds earlier. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to blink. One of the reporters near the staircase slowly lowered his champagne glass with trembling fingers. Somewhere behind me, a woman whispered, "Oh my God." Vivian turned back toward me with disbelief flooding her face for the first time all evening. Not anger. Not humiliation. Shock. Like nobody had ever told her no before. A faint red mark colored her pale cheek beneath the chandelier light. The diamond ring on her left hand caught the light as her fingers curled slowly into a fist. Around us, security shifted instantly. I heard shoes against marble. Heard radios crackle softly beneath jackets. 3 men in black suits began moving toward me from different sides of the ballroom with the calm efficiency of people trained for situations like this. My pulse slammed violently in my throat. This was the moment everyone had warned me about. The moment people disappeared over. Vivian took one step toward me. "You pathetic little, stop." Damien's voice cut through the ballroom quietly. But every single person obeyed instantly. The guards froze mid-step. Vivian herself stopped speaking. Even the orchestra players looked terrified to breathe too loudly. Damien stood exactly where he had been the entire time beside the staircase, one hand still inside his pocket while rain streaked down the massive windows behind him. Calm. Expressionless. But his eyes were locked onto me now with an intensity that made my stomach tighten painfully. I could still feel champagne dripping slowly down my neck onto my collar. Vivian stared at him in disbelief. "Damien." Her voice cracked slightly around his name. "Did you just see what she did?" He did not answer immediately. His gaze moved once across my face, lingering briefly on the redness still visible against my cheek. Then he looked at Vivian. I saw enough. The room remained frozen in suffocating silence. Vivian let out a sharp laugh that sounded almost nervous. "Then tell them to remove her." Damien tilted his head slightly. "Remove her for what?" Nobody in the ballroom seemed prepared for that question. Least of all Vivian. "She hit me." Damien glanced briefly toward the shattered champagne glass still lying near the staircase. Then toward the stain soaking my uniform. Then finally back to Vivian herself. "Interesting," he murmured softly. "Because from where I was standing, you touched her first." The tension in the room shifted instantly. Not gone. Worse. More dangerous somehow. Vivian's face lost color. "You are defending a maid?" Damien finally removed his hand from his pocket and adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit with slow precision. The movement looked casual, but every guard in the room straightened slightly like soldiers awaiting orders. "No," he said calmly. "I am correcting behavior that embarrassed me publicly tonight." Vivian blinked at him in shock. "Embarrassed you?" Damien stepped closer at last. Not toward Vivian. Toward me. My breath caught immediately. Up close, his presence felt overwhelming in a way cameras could never capture. Not loud. Not aggressive. Controlled. Dangerous because of how controlled. He stopped directly in front of me while the ballroom watched in terrified silence. Rain hammered the windows behind us hard enough to sound like distant applause. I lowered my eyes instinctively, suddenly aware of the champagne soaking my hair and the trembling in my hands. Then Damien reached past me calmly and picked up the white linen napkin still lying on the marble floor. The same one Vivian had ordered me to kneel over. He held it out toward me without looking away from my face. "Miss Bennet," he said quietly, his pale gray eyes unreadable. "Nobody in this house kneels again tonight." The silence after Damien's words felt heavier than thunder. Nobody moved while he held the linen napkin out toward me beneath the crystal glow of the chandeliers. My hands trembled as I took it from him carefully, terrified to even brush his fingers by accident. Vivian stared at him like she no longer recognized the man standing beside her. "Damien," she said slowly, her voice tightening around every syllable, "she assaulted me in front of half the city." Damien finally looked at her again. Calm. Controlled. Cold enough to freeze the entire ballroom. "And yet," he said softly, "you are still standing." A nervous murmur spread through the guests before dying immediately when several guards glanced toward the crowd. Vivian's face flushed with disbelief. "You cannot seriously humiliate me over some servant." His jaw tightened almost invisibly at the word servant. Then perhaps, he replied, you should have behaved like someone worthy of respect tonight. The words landed harder than any shouting could have. Vivian actually stepped backward slightly as if the sentence physically struck her. Around us, powerful men suddenly became fascinated by their drinks. Women avoided eye contact entirely. Nobody wanted to be remembered standing on the wrong side of this moment. Damien turned away from Vivian before she could answer and looked toward the head housekeeper standing frozen near the staircase. Take Miss Bennet upstairs. My stomach dropped instantly. Upstairs sounded dangerous in houses like this. The housekeeper blinked nervously. Sir. Damien's pale eyes shifted toward her slowly. Do you need me to repeat myself? No, Mr. Moretti. She moved immediately toward me. This way. I hesitated. Every survival instinct screamed at me not to follow anyone deeper into this mansion. But refusing Damien Moretti in front of 200 wealthy guests seemed even more dangerous. Vivian laughed suddenly behind us, sharp and bitter. You are protecting her now. Damien stopped walking but did not turn around immediately. Rain slid down the giant windows behind him while lightning briefly illuminated the ballroom in pale white flashes. No, he said quietly after a moment. I am protecting what little dignity still exists in my house. Vivian's face went completely still. Not angry anymore. Wounded. That somehow frightened me more. The housekeeper guided me quickly toward the grand staircase while whispers exploded softly behind us. I could feel eyes following every step I took across the marble floor. Some shocked. Some jealous. Some afraid. Upstairs, the mansion became quieter. The music downstairs faded beneath the sound of rain and distant thunder while the housekeeper hurried me through a hallway lined with expensive paintings and dark wooden doors. You should not have done that, she whispered finally without looking at me. Done what? My voice cracked slightly. Hit her. The woman stopped walking long enough to stare at me in disbelief. No, her expression darkened. Make him notice you. Cold settled heavily into my stomach at those words. Before I could answer, she opened a bedroom door near the end of the hallway. The room inside looked larger than my entire apartment in Queens. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan glowing beneath the storm while a fireplace crackled softly against dark stone walls. Wait here, she said quietly. Someone will bring clean clothes. I should leave. She gave me a strange look. Nobody leaves the Moretti estate during a storm unless Damien says so. Then she disappeared, shutting the door behind her softly. I stood there alone, soaked in champagne, my cheeks still burning faintly, trying to understand how my life had unraveled so completely in less than an hour. Downstairs, muffled music continued through the floors beneath me. Somewhere far away, guests were probably still discussing the maid who struck Vivian DeLuca and survived. I walked slowly toward the giant windows overlooking the city lights trembling beneath sheets of rain. My reflection stared back at me faintly in the glass. Messy hair. Damp uniform. Exhausted eyes. I looked like someone standing in the middle of a mistake too large to escape. Then a voice spoke quietly behind me from the doorway. Most people apologize after slapping the future Mrs. Moretti. My entire body froze before I turned and found Damien standing there alone. My pulse stumbled so hard it hurt. Damien stood in the doorway with one hand resting loosely against the dark wooden frame, his charcoal suit jacket gone now, the sleeves of his white dress shirt rolled neatly to his forearms. Rainwater still darkened parts of his hair from outside, though somehow he looked even more controlled than before. More dangerous. I stepped back instinctively. I should go home. His pale gray eyes studied me quietly. That was not an apology. I am not sorry. The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence stretched between us while thunder rolled faintly across Manhattan outside the windows. For one terrifying second, I thought I had finally crossed the line that would destroy everything. Then Damien's mouth shifted slightly. Not a smile exactly. Something smaller. Sharper. Interested. No, he murmured. I do not think you are. I hated the way my heartbeat reacted to that answer. Your fiancé humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. My voice sounded steadier now that anger had returned. What exactly was I supposed to do? Damien walked farther into the room slowly, each movement calm enough to make me more nervous. Most people would have stayed quiet. I let out a soft laugh without humor. That sounds miserable. His eyes held mine for a long moment. It usually is. The fireplace crackled softly behind him while rain streaked across the giant windows overlooking the city. Up here. Manhattan looked distant. Small somehow. Like the entire world below belonged to him. Damien stopped near the fireplace, studying me with the same unsettling focus he had downstairs. You are not afraid of me. The statement felt more dangerous than a question. I crossed my arms tightly against the damp fabric clinging to my skin. I think everybody is afraid of you. That was not my question. My throat tightened. The truth sat painfully heavy in my chest because I was afraid of him. Terrified, actually. Not because he shouted or threatened people. Because he never needed to. Men like Damien Moretti controlled rooms without raising their voices. Controlled entire lives with a single sentence. But somehow that fear felt different from the humiliation downstairs. Cleaner. I do not know you well enough to answer honestly, I said carefully. Another pause. Then Damien nodded once like I had passed some invisible test. Fair answer. A knock interrupted the tension before I could think of anything else to say. An older woman entered carrying folded clothes and a small medical kit. She froze slightly seeing Damien still inside the room. Sir. Leave them, he said without looking away from me. She obeyed immediately, placing everything carefully on the bed before disappearing again. Damien glanced toward the medical kit briefly. Your cheek is bruising. I touched my face instinctively. The skin still burned faintly beneath my fingertips. I have had worse. The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Damien's expression changed almost invisibly. Not softer. Darker. From who? The question came too quickly. Too quietly. Warning bells rang instantly in my head. Nobody. His gaze sharpened. That was not an answer. I looked away toward the storm outside because something about those eyes made lying difficult. Life, I said finally. Sometimes life hits people. Silence filled the room again. Heavy this time. Damien moved toward the windows slowly until he stood beside me overlooking the rain-soaked skyline. Up close, I noticed the faint scar near his jawline for the first time. The kind earned through surviving things most people never saw. People. Like Vivian, he said quietly while staring out at the city lights below, believe fear and respect are the same thing. I swallowed hard but stayed silent. Tonight, he continued, you embarrassed her because you reminded everyone in that ballroom they are not. Thunder echoed faintly outside. Somewhere below us, music from the party still drifted through the mansion. But up here, standing beside Damien Moretti while rain battered the windows and Manhattan glowed beneath the storm, the rest of the world suddenly felt very far away. Then his phone buzzed once in his pocket. Damien glanced down at the screen briefly before his jaw tightened almost invisibly. Of course, he muttered under his breath. My stomach sank immediately. What happened? His eyes lifted slowly back to mine. Vivian just fired every employee who witnessed tonight. The words hit me harder than the slap downstairs. She fired them. Damien's expression remained unreadable as he slipped the phone back into his pocket. Every server. Every maid. Every bartender who witnessed tonight. Rain hammered against the windows hard enough to rattle the glass while anger climbed slowly into my chest again. Because of me. No, his voice sharpened slightly for the first time. Because Vivian believes fear repairs humiliation. I stared at him in disbelief. And you are just going to let that happen? Damien turned toward the fireplace quietly, the orange glow cutting shadows across the sharp lines of his face. You assume people tell me everything before acting. You are Damien Moretti. The words escaped before I could soften them. Everybody in this city acts like you control gravity itself. Something flickered briefly across his face. Amusement maybe. Bitter amusement. That is the problem with reputation, he murmured. Eventually people stop seeing the man underneath it. Silence settled heavily between us again while I tried to process everything. Somewhere downstairs, dozens of innocent employees were probably panicking about rent, groceries, children, bills. Because one rich woman could not handle embarrassment. The thought made my stomach twist painfully. I should not have hit her. Damien looked at me carefully. But I swallowed hard. But she wanted me to feel small. My voice cracked slightly despite my effort to control it. And for 1 second I hated her more than I feared the consequences. The fireplace crackled softly. Damien's gaze stayed fixed on me with unsettling intensity. Do you know what I saw downstairs tonight? I shook my head once. He walked slowly toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan again before answering. I saw a room full of powerful people watch a woman be humiliated publicly. His reflection stared back at us faintly through the rain-streaked glass. And only one person in that ballroom remembered she was still human. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Nobody had defended me like that before. Not teachers. Not managers. Not life. You barely know me. Damien's eyes met mine through the reflection in the window. I know enough. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Too close somehow. I looked away first. You should probably go downstairs before your guests think you disappeared. Let them wonder. His answer came instantly. Dangerous words from a man like him. Before I could respond, another knock interrupted the room. This time the tension shifted immediately the second Damien opened the door. The guard standing outside looked calm, but not relaxed. Sir. Damien's posture changed almost invisibly. Harder. Colder. What is it? Miss Vivian left the estate 20 minutes ago. And? She took the engagement ring off before leaving. Silence followed those words. Heavy silence. The kind rich families probably built wars around. The guard hesitated before continuing carefully. There is more. Damien's expression darkened. Say it. Several guests recorded what happened downstairs. Videos are already spreading online. My stomach dropped instantly. Of course they were. Manhattan elites pretended to hate scandal while feeding on it constantly. Somewhere across the city, people were probably already replaying the moment I struck Vivian DeLuca beside crystal chandeliers and million-dollar paintings. The guard glanced briefly toward me before speaking again. The press is calling it the slap heard across Manhattan. Heat rushed into my face so quickly I wanted the floor to swallow me alive. Damien closed his eyes briefly like someone developing a headache. Wonderful. Sir, the guard added carefully, the board members from Romano Holdings are requesting a statement immediately. They are concerned about how this affects the engagement announcement next month. Damien's jaw tightened sharply at that. Then he asked the question quietly enough to terrify me. And what exactly are they saying about Miss Bennett? The guard hesitated. Most of the internet believes she will disappear by morning. Cold flooded my entire body. Damien looked toward me slowly after those words. Calm face. Pale gray eyes. Completely unreadable. Then he spoke with terrifying softness. Make sure nobody touches her. The guard disappeared quietly after Damien's order, leaving the room wrapped once again in rain, firelight, and suffocating silence. I stood completely still near the windows, my pulse hammering against my ribs while one sentence repeated itself endlessly inside my head. Make sure nobody touches her. Men like Damien Moretti did not speak carelessly. Every word sounded deliberate. Permanent somehow. You should not do that. My voice came out softer than I intended. Damien looked toward me calmly. Do what? Protect me. His expression did not change, but something colder moved behind his eyes. You believe I am protecting you because I am kind. I swallowed hard. Are you? The corner of his mouth shifted slightly again in that almost smile I still could not understand. No, honest. Brutally honest. Somehow that frightened me less than lies would have. I crossed my arms tighter against myself while Manhattan glowed beneath the storm outside. Then why? Damien walked slowly toward the fireplace before answering. Because people are watching what happens next. That sounds worse somehow. It should. He rested one hand against the dark stone mantel, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight now instead of the city. If I allow fear to punish someone publicly after they defended their dignity, then everyone downstairs learns the same lesson Vivian believes. My throat tightened unexpectedly. And what lesson is that? Damien's gaze locked onto mine fully. That power belongs only to cruel people. Silence settled heavily between us again. The kind of silence that changes something whether you want it to or not. Downstairs, the party was finally ending. I could hear distant footsteps, muffled voices, car doors somewhere outside beneath the rain. But up here, time felt strange. Slower. Like the world beyond this room no longer mattered quite as much. I stared at Damien carefully, trying to understand how a man feared by half the city could sound almost exhausted talking about cruelty. Then I noticed it. The framed photograph sitting partly hidden near the bookshelf beside the fireplace. A woman stood smiling beside a young boy around 12 years old with dark hair and pale gray eyes identical to Damien's. The woman looked warm. Kind. Nothing like this house. Damien noticed where I was looking immediately. My mother, he said quietly. I glanced back toward him. Something in his face had changed again. Softer now. Older somehow. She worked 3 jobs after my father died. His voice remained calm, but quieter than before. One of them cleaning hotel rooms for people who treated her like she was invisible. My chest tightened painfully. Damien looked toward the rain-streaked windows instead of me now. When I was 13, I watched a woman throw wine on her uniform because the towels smelled wrong. The fireplace crackled softly between us. My mother apologized. His jaw tightened once. All the way home. Suddenly I understood. Not everything. Never everything. But enough. Enough to recognize the anger beneath his calm. Enough to realize tonight was never really about Vivian. That is why you smiled downstairs. Damien's eyes lifted back to mine slowly. I did not smile because you hit her. His voice dropped lower. I smiled because for the first time in years, I watched someone refuse to kneel. Heat rose unexpectedly behind my eyes. I looked away immediately toward the storm because crying in front of Damien Moretti felt unbearable. After a moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small black card embossed with silver lettering. Moretti Holdings. A private number beneath it. He held it toward me calmly. Tomorrow the press will try to find you. I stared at the card without taking it. And people like Vivian do not enjoy losing. Thunder rolled heavily across Manhattan again. Damien's gaze remained fixed steadily on mine. If anyone threatens your job, your apartment, your family, or your brother's medical treatment, my entire body froze. How do you know about Tyler? I know everything that enters my house, Claire. The answer should have terrified me. Instead it only made my heart beat louder. Slowly, I took the card from his hand. The silver lettering glimmered faintly in the firelight between my fingers. Damien stepped back toward the doorway then, his expression unreadable once more. Get some sleep, he said quietly. Tomorrow your life becomes very complicated. He paused once before leaving. Then his pale gray eyes met mine one final time. But for what it is worth, rain battered the windows behind him while Manhattan burned gold beneath the storm. You were the only honest person in my house tonight.